Welcome everybody. As Benny said, my name is Tamlin Adams, and I'll be your host for the webinar. If you have any questions, if you could please just hold off and type them in the chat area, and we'll endeavour to answer them after the presentation. Today, our topic for discussion is professional indemnity insurance, and we are pleased to be joined by Craig Lewis, the chairman of CEAS. I would just like to welcome Ian Watson, who will have a chat with Craig Lewis about PI insurance. Welcome, Ian.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today, we're really pleased to have Craig Lewis with us. Craig is the chairman of the board of directors for CEAS, the insurance group in New Zealand. And I'll start by asking Craig a few questions. And Craig, what was the foundation of CEAS? It's quite illustrious history, hasn't it?
Thanks, Ian. It has got a very proud history, especially in the insurance world. Prior to the 1960s, there wasn't a lot of instances of engineers being sued for not doing their work properly. And in the early 1960s, the incidence of claims was growing, and PI insurance was getting more and more expensive on an individual basis. So in 1966, a group of engineers from the consultants division of the New Zealand Institute of Engineers, which is the predecessor of IPENS and now Engineering New Zealand, got together with a view to a group scheme to give greater purchasing power and a more robust policy for professional indemnity. So so it really started out of the Engineering Institute that we know today in 1966. So been going for 56 years, and CEAS stands for the Consulting Engineers Advancement Society, and we've got about 360 members currently, which represents all sort of disciplines, and mainly small to medium-sized firms throughout the country. A lot of the big firms either self-insure or insure offshore through their parent companies.
Okay. What sort of risks do we face as particularly small practice engineers? What do you see as the kind of major stumbling points, if you like, or risks that we face, and where we need to involve our insurance partner?
Yeah. Life generally is a risky business, and has a lot of areas of risk. You know, whether it's vehicle insurance or contents or health insurance or contents, but as engineers, and it's a shame that Peter's interview got cut off because he was drawing on a whole lot of good points and the need to be a good communicator and to be honest and professional and to have common sense. I think that applies to all engineers and not just the general practitioners group. But we are, as society becomes more and more litigious, we are exposed to an increasing array of risks. The key risk we're all exposed to, regardless of the scale of your practice, is our professional liability, which is what professional indemnity insurance is for, and our professional liabilities can arise under contract and common law or under statute. So that is really the exposure we have for making mistakes, for omitting to do something that we should have, and being negligent in really what a reasonably sound professional engineer would do. It also covers making negligent misstatements. So, you know, giving wrongful advice to a client or someone in the public. So one of the things that engineers are always advised about is giving off the cuff advice to your mates or your neighbours over the fence. You've got to be very considered and that sort of thing.
Yes.
So that so that's the main risk where you need an insurance partner and a good professional indemnity policy is when we make mistakes. There's also liability to the public, and that's what a public liability policy is for. Is if if we involved in a building project on public or private land, and something may happen, something may sort of partially collapse or fall off a building and risk public safety or property damage. The other area where we are exposed to an increasing number of risks is under statute, and that's what statutory liability cover is for. And that's where we're exposed to risks under various pieces of legislation, such as the Fair Trading Act, the Consumer Guarantees Act, the Health and Safety at Work Act, and the Privacy Act. So it's exposure that we have to, under all of those to the public and also to territorial authorities in issuing producer statements and other statements. We also have, we are liable to others, both as directors of companies, as employers, and as also as employees. So we are liable for the actions of our employees, and that's why robust insurance policies are required to to cover the work that we're responsible for, but that also that others do for us. And the final risk, without getting into too much detail, that we are increasingly exposed to is cyber risk. It's a key point now. Not many days that you don't pick up the paper and read about the exposure of the Waikato District Health Board or various companies, even very large companies with great IT systems. So cyber risk and being exposed to ransomware attacks and hackers is something we need to be very vigilant of.
Very topical.
Yeah.
Craig, are some disciplines more risky than others? I think you've got a nice pie diagram there, but some people may not have seen that, but it's quite, to me, it's quite an eye opener. The sort of breakup, if you like, of issues around the various disciplines.
Yeah, Bernie, if you could put up the first pie chart. I think there's quite a lot of media coverage of since the Canterbury earthquake sequence and up until now of high-profile structural collapses and issues, geotech and civil failures. So it's easy to think that they're the riskier professions, but that's just a snapshot from last year of notifications for our group, and just shows that 30% of the insurance notifications our members are encouraged to make notifications. It's really just when you have the first inkling of something maybe going to become a problem. It doesn't necessarily mean that a problem will develop into a claim and you'll end up being sued or paying money. Notifying a claim is really just to give your insurers a chance to help hopefully deflect it and make it go away. So that's our last year's notifications, 30% structural. Some of these overlap as well because they might have a foundation and a geotech component as well. 8% foundations, 12% geotech, and on it goes. So it doesn't mean that structural engineers aren't as good a performers as other disciplines. what that does is it reflects really closely the volume of work that comes out of the different disciplines. So about 2/3 of our members operate across the structural, foundation, civil and geotech fields. So yeah, so I don't think there's any significantly greater risk of one discipline over another. Everyone's exposed to similar issues in their professional day-to-day activities.
Yeah, I like the way you've got retaining walls as a separate issue. They always seem it's amazing that they show up as 6% of claims, but they always seem to be a potential risk area.
Yeah. Historically, one area of absolutely greater risk have been the weather tightness issues and leaky building issues, which different engineers do get exposed to. Often it's when working with architects or facade teams or cladding teams, and that is something through the early 2000s that a lot of claims were made over, and what we saw through that period was really a blanket approach of dragging everyone into a leaky building claim that had any involvement in that, even if it was someone who had designed one steel beam, well buried within a building and nothing to do with the water tightness of the building.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Craig, CEAS is quite unique in the fact that you help engineers when a problem arises, even before it goes to court. You provide technical advice by virtue of another engineer, and you also provide legal advice. Is it correct that there is actually no charges for that service at the early stages?
That is correct. Because CEAS is an organisation that was started by engineers for engineers and is still run by engineers, I think the robustness of our policies and our offering has really come about through the experience over that 56 years. So the CEAS policy is what's termed a costs exclusive policy. So you don't pay for the legal advice, and if a whole lot of legal advice and cost is incurred in deflecting a claim or settling a claim, that doesn't you don't draw on your deductible until you actually pay if you're found to be at fault and end up contributing some cost to settle a claim. That's when your insurers and yourself through your deductible start paying. But the legal costs as part of a cost exclusive policy aren't paid by you; they're paid by the insurer.
Mm.
Yeah. So
it's
it is
very reassuring, isn't it?
Yeah, but believe it is quite unique.
Mm. So there's about 350 member firms. Is that what you said? 350.
Yeah, 350 to 360 currently.
Yeah. How many cases, sort of claim notifications would you receive in a year, and how many get resolved before they go to court?
Yeah, Bernie, if you could put up the second slide. So that's again for a period, and the reason that it's quite old is that claims and notifications often take a long time to mature. It's, while all the background work is being done on finding out who's at fault and what the issues are. So that's why I put up that pie chart going back 4 years now. But it is quite typical. We get about 97, around 100 notifications from members per year. As I said before, members are encouraged to notify so that our brokers and our legal experts can help deflect as much of the claim and as many claims as possible. So 57% of that 100 odd get closed and don't amount to anything. Big tick.
Wow.
They're the ones we want. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another 12% of claims are successfully defended by our brokers and our legal experts. That is really just saying, well, our member has no, nothing to defend here. It's a spurious claim. The fault is with other parties. Another 17% of claims get settled with some payment. Recognising some partial fault in it. So, and then claims are still being defended. That's the sort of long tail ones that take quite a while to mature, and then uncertain ones. So about 70% of claims are successfully defended without members having to put their hand in their pocket, but with contribution from the group for that legal assistance. Very few claims actually go to court. Very few, might be one or two a year, and that's because the cost of going to trial is extremely expensive, and it's in the interest of all parties to try to settle claims either by agreement or through mediation before going to court. The cost of a high court trial in New Zealand is well in excess of $100,000, so no one wants to go there. Probably 5 to 10 of our of the notifications per year would end up in mediation, and that's the claim settled with payment. So professional mediator, everyone gets around the table with their legal advisors and goes, okay, well, you're X percent at fault here, you're Y percent. We want a contribution from you of this and you of this, and the mediation process is very successful in New Zealand at getting that agreement and in saving the time and expense of going to court.
That process can be quite daunting for someone that hasn't been in the room before, because you can feel as if you are totally innocent, and yet your insurance company is advising you to settle, or you might feel that your exposure is quite small and you want to fight it, but there's a kind of a commercial reality in there, isn't there, where the thing is you either settle now or you go to court, and that's kind of a lever, is it? You'd call it that, something like that.
Yeah, that can be quite a galling process, and I learned a long time ago, as soon as a claim is made, it ceases being about engineering, and it becomes a commercial and insurance issue, and it's extracting from that situation as quickly and as cost effectively as possible. From time to time there will be instances where members are 110% sure that they're not at fault, and will still contribute to effectively make a claim go away. That is a really stressful experience, and something that is just plainly not fair. That's pretty rare. And from time to time, our insurers, will back members, going the full hog if they're adamant, and also to stop any precedent setting too.
Right.
The last thing the industry needs is for some, smart legal advisors of on the client side, trying to extract funds basically spuriously and where there isn't fault. So from time to time, our lawyers will make an example and to avoid any precedent setting.
Okay, right. Do you have an estimate of what the legal costs might be for a case where it just goes to that mediation stage, before going to court? Is there, I mean, if you're insured with another company, for instance, you've got to find your own lawyer and pay those fees. But with CEAS, that's actually covered. And so I think it's important for engineers to know what, the difference in between companies and what that sort of figure might be if you did have a claim. Do you have an estimate of what it costs?
I do. I got our brokers to to look back over a few years. So for the last 3 years, the legal defence costs associated with the blue and orange segments there, and that's the claims that are successfully defended without any payment, or the ones that close without any payment, is typically $15,000 to $20,000.
Wow, 15 to 20,000.
Yeah,
wow.
To bat away claims without foundation.
Wow. Yeah.
And then the other 30%, the average cost of defending claims, and including settling with payment and going through. Some claims take 5, 6, 8 years to fully mature. So it's a very long process, and often the lawyers are the only ones that win out of that. By charging time and invoicing, for lengthy periods. But to defend claims where payments are, and that includes going to mediation, the average costs are over $50,000.
Wow.
In most cases. And as I said, for the rare case where claims go to court, can be well in excess of $100,000. So,
wow. Yeah. Craig, just jumping back a question here, but most cases have multiple parties involved. Why do you think? Why is this? Could you explain, just for those young engineers maybe, why is there always multiple parties involved in a claim?
I think it's a reflection of how interconnected the construction industry is. It really doesn't matter what sort of building project you're involved in. There's always a number of other parties that you're reliant on for the supply of information, for subsequent disciplines, for services consultants who might penetrate structure or provide other services within a building. Surveyors and architects provide some of the basic inputs that we need before we can do our work as engineers. So I think there's usually a number of parties that are responsible for the finished product, and then that goes into the on-site work with contractors and subcontractors. The fault may squarely lie at one party's feet as to who's responsible for that, but it's never that black and white. There's always other parties that could have altered the outcome of that if they'd raised an issue in a timely manner, or if they had knowingly carried on with work knowing that something was wrong. So that's why lawyers will usually throw the net far and wide to capture everyone involved in a building process. To give themselves the time to just fully investigate, who all the responsible parties are. The client may be a responsible party if they didn't give consultants all the information they need, or the proper scope, or if someone was operating without, knowing the full intended use of a piece of engineering. So it's very rare that there's ever only one party that's responsible. It might be basic errors in the input information that we rely on, or parties maybe changing stuff down the track and not informing us. An architect changing the plan or the span of a beam or something else. So
Yeah, no, that's good. Well, I remember one case I had got dragged into a leaky home building situation, and you know, I actually did a peer review of the design, so I wasn't even the designer, and had to fight and fight and fight to get out of it. I finally did get out of it, but it was one heck of a battle. Yeah, so it's pretty daunting. Craig, sorry, go on.
Just a quick aside on that. I was on a claims committee. So CEAS has a claims committee, which is sort of 2 or 3 of the board members who basically act as members' friends. So they're there to help members through, you know, the very stressful process of when a notification is made and when a claim is made against you. You know, it's sort of it attacks engineers at their core when, you know, someone accuses you of doing something wrong. But I think when I was on the claims committee through some of the early leaky building claims, the engineer was 12th or 13th defendant. So, you know, the TA and the architect and the contractor and the plasterer and the facade people, you know, so many parties further up the chain of liability, and the engineers sort of captured and has to go through the process. Very frustrating, and often it's because we have robust insurance policies and seen as having deep pockets. Yep.
All right, Craig, is there any other points that you had on your list to raise? We've got some questions to answer, but is there any other points that you wanted to make?
One of the questions I think, Ian, that you that you did maybe gloss over was how we avoid being sued, which you know, there's a few clear points there, which some might seem as very common sense and obvious, but the best ways of managing risk is, first and foremost, is to have a very clear scope of work of what we are engaged to do. Have that clearly written with your client, what we are engaged to do, but also any grey areas that are obvious should be done by other parties. Have it in writing what we aren't engaged to do.
What we're not.
Always have a signed contract. Make sure it's signed by the party that is engaging you, and you know, not some agent of it. It's better to have it signed directly by the person paying the bills, and ideally that contract would be CEAS or the industry short form agreement. Always be aware of bespoke conditions and odd conditions of a contract. Always limit liability, and something that is fair for the commission of work, and under no circumstances, you know, agree to a contract with unlimited liability. You'll find that no insurer will be behind you, and that would be the first thing that an insurer will walk away from, a contract with unlimited liability. Always ensure you've got adequate fees to do the job properly. Don't be bullied into doing a partial service or not monitoring your work. I think engineers throughout the country are nice and busy now, so you know, it's the perfect climate now to really insist on a proper, thorough engagement and being paid for that engagement. Thorough internal checking processes, you know, good QA habits, and checking within your firm, and if a second set of eyes is needed over a problem, then, you know, a buddy system with another, you know, if you're a sole practitioner, having someone else that you respect and trust, and just to you know, review and talk over work with. Being really clear in communication with your clients. And this hobby horse of mine is, engineers are usually involved at the front end of projects, and I think as funding and supply chain issues and inflationary pressures put pressure on the budget of projects, it's good for us to be able to get in, complete our work, sign it off, send this final invoice in, and get that money in the door before the kitty's dry at the end of it.
That's right. Yeah.
Let the painter and the joiner scrap over what might or might not be left in
Yes.
in a
It's
budget.
funny how money can sometimes lead to a claim. If isn't it? Like, I think you would observe that. Yeah.
We see a lot of claims like that, which are just a blatant try on any excuse to avoid paying a consultant's final bill.
Yeah.
Mislab's got a crack in it, and it is often it is just a try on.
Yeah.
Good record keeping. Always keep good diary notes and file notes of phone calls. For the odd case that goes to court, even a rough handwritten note about a conversation or about what was agreed will always carry way more weight for a trial judge than someone's recollection from 5 or 6 years ago.
Yep.
And
notes.
Only ever give considered advice. Don't operate outside your field of expertise. It's something that Peter touched on in his opening. And always let your clients make the commercial decisions.
Yes.
It's in their nature to try to be as helpful as possible, but we're not the ones reaping the reward of most projects at the end of the line. So let the client make the commercial decisions.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah. Very good. All right. Well, Tamlin's got some questions to put to you, Craig, and we'll see how we go with those.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Craig and Ian. I'll just go into the questions list. So from Anonymous, is it advisable for engineers to have their own professional indemnity insurance, even if their firm has insurance that covers them?
No, not in our opinion. They could ask for, it's a good discussion to have with an employer, just that their employers does have good, robust professional indemnity insurance that covers their employees, but the vast majority of policies in New Zealand provide coverage for employees.
Okay, great. From Martin, would you differentiate between temporary works and permanent works, geotech, civil, structural?
I assume that is sort of related to the pie chart. In any temporary works notifications would probably have been captured in the structural 30-odd%, I think it was 30%. But in contracting for work, temporary works is something that a lot of engineers get involved in, and that should clearly be scope, part of their scope and their contractual arrangements as a separate package of work from the final design.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, from Michael here. Does CEAS get political on how to reduce unnecessary costs? Example, addressing the approach to adding any and every engineer, council, individual into a claim in hope of using the joint and several law to hang all the total claim on a smaller party if needed?
It does. This is something that we've been lobbying for a long time, along with Engineering New Zealand and ACNZ. The example I gave about when I was on the claims committee of engineers being 12th or 13th defendant, there was a number of cases out of the Auckland area where the Auckland City Council, at the first hint of a weather tightness issue, were opening the property file and throwing the blanket over everyone. CEAS, we got our expert legal advisors, Morgan Kokal from Auckland, to draft a very short, succinct letter on that basis that we recognise, we acknowledge your letter, but we reserve the right to recover all costs. We don't believe our members are responsible in any way for this issue, we reserve the right to cover costs. And that had a very quick and desired effect of heading off those spurious claims, which I think Michael is getting at. So yes, it's a constant work on to make sure that engineers and their generally robust policies and deep pockets effectively aren't just brought to the table to try and contribute. Yeah, but it's a continual work on, as is the the other thing is the amount of effort that goes into our industry standard contracts and contract conditions. People just don't realise the number of parties involved in each revision of CEAS and the short form agreement. And the reason that so much effort's put into those is that they are as robust as possible and head off these, potentially spurious claims. So all the more reason to stick with those conditions and don't get bullied into using some bespoke client conditions.
Absolutely. Okay, and from Mark here, what are the minimum insurance requirements, type and cover for an engineer setting up as a sole trader?
Mark, that depends totally on the sort of scale of work and the type of work that you're getting into. If you're going to be issuing producer statements, you have to give the TA an undertaking that you carry a policy of at least $250,000, I think it is now. But there's not a significant difference between carrying, say, $500,000 of cover and $1 million worth of cover. So it's worth just investigating those options with your broker. The other key variable in that equation is your elected deductible. So you might find that your premium for $1 million, say, if you elect to back yourself in your own QA procedures and carry a slightly higher deductible. So I would think if you're starting off with, reasonably small scale projects, you'd be wanting to look at least $500,000 worth of cover. Public liability cover is a lot cheaper than professional indemnity. So a policy for $1 or $2 million worth of public liability cover is not that expensive.
Great.
Yeah, but totally dependent on the scale of projects and what your exposure is. The other thing to remember is also that under the Consumer Guarantees Act, you can't limit your liability to domestic clients. So the exposures are higher there. If you're working on large, high value private residences, so you really don't want to skimp overly on the amount of PI cover that you carry.
Great. From Anonymous, do individual staff need their own, or is this not what we had earlier? Do individual staff not need their own personal indemnity insurance, or does the director's insurance cover all the staff? Is insurance covering the company or the specific people? I suppose that's additional.
Yeah. We touched on it, I think, the first question.
Yeah.
D&O cover, directors and officers cover, really just does cover the directors and senior office holders in companies. But the professional indemnity policy covers the errors, acts and omissions of staff as well. So a robust PI policy does cover all staff.
Great. What changes to staff's insurance are needed when they become chartered, if any?
None. The same as it's whether staff are chartered or not. It's covered under a robust PI policy. But I think care is needed as to what signatories sign producer statements, and you do need to be careful that you are signing as a chartered professional engineer operating within your field of expertise, and including that captured on the CAB register. So and not drifting out and signing off work that is outside your field of expertise.
Great. From CSC, are claims related to temporary works common?
No, not disproportionately from those other general notifications. I think it's a field that requires some expertise and thoroughness, absolutely. But no, I'm not aware of any disproportionate amount of claims out of that.
Okay, great. From Mark, are you still liable if you're not signing off on the final detail or document?
You are. If you're an engineer working on a project, and a larger project might have multiple engineers, and with all of the work signed off by one of the principals in a company, you're still responsible for your own work as an engineer, and covered by your company's policy. So yeah.
Is that applicable if you're not chartered as well?
Yes, it is. Yeah, all engineers are responsible for their work, and okay. It's one of the drivers that the government MBIE is trying to instigate under the occupational regulation changes, is to have that register that captures all engineers. So yeah, we're all responsible, unfortunately.
Okay. From Namir, what are CEAS thoughts of clients requesting to issue either PS1 or PS2 as generic certification of their products?
Be very, very cautious with that. Yeah, it crops up from time to time, and it's really drifting into product design and product guarantees. So yeah, ideally, and I know it's not always the case, but individual producer statements would cover individual bodies of work, because even something that you think is is the most proprietary item, like a cladding system or a balustrade system, or you often never know exactly the circumstances and situation that it will be used in. Is it exposed to higher wind or snow or seismic loadings or balustrade loadings,
crowd loadings,
crowd loadings, on and on it goes. So yeah. No, blanket producer statements are really problematic.
Great, good to know. From Dean, if you're subcontracted to a firm, give them a hand when they are overloaded, would you need your own PI if irregular work? Or would that be covered by the firm that you're contracted to? I assume.
It would depend on your terms of engagement with that firm. I think the safest bet is if it should be covered by your own insurance, but you just need to make it very clear in your engagement and remuneration with that firm that they are fully responsible for your work and signing it off. It sort of drifts into that work that you're subcontracting to a firm, whether you are taking responsibility for the final sign-offs and producer statements, final inspections. Yeah, so you'd either want it covered by your own insurance, or you'd want a clear statement from that firm that they've run it past their insurers and their insurance policy covers your work.
If you were signing on behalf of the company, I would assume it would go on to the company then, or not?
Yeah, and that gets messy as well. If you're subcontracting to a company, yeah, you shouldn't be. If you're subcontracting to a company, then I would have thought that they should be signing off that work.
Okay.
Yeah, unless you are taking responsibility for a full package of work. Yeah,
Okay.
it really depends on whether you're responsible for the whole body of work or you're just subcontracting, you know, basically hours of work. Yeah.
Okay.
Depends on the commission.
Is CEAS PI insurance policy suitable for sole practitioners? Are there many policies on this basis?
Ian can probably answer that. CEAS's members, we've got a lot of sole practitioners right through to 100 plus person firms. So it's a tailored policy.
Great. And then from Greg, back to temporary works. Do you see an insurance related conflict if the designer does both temporary and permanent works on the same project? As a contractor, we often find designers don't want to do temporary works or designs for their own work.
No, my personal view is that the best placed person to design a lot of the temporary works is the principal designer. No one knows the nature of the structure and the load paths and how it's been contemplated to be built and whatever built-in stresses sort of thing might occur as the building is staged than the principal designer. So no problem at all. I think too much temporary works now is sort of handed off to other parties, thinking, well, maybe that's de-risking the project. I think the flip side actually occurs, that if something were to happen, the principal designer would be at the table as well. So I think there needs to be a clear demarcation of who's doing what, and no problem at all having a separate sub-commission, if you like, if you're the principal designer doing the temporary works, but you just need to agree on what that remuneration and scope of work is with your client and the contractor, rather than just saying, oh, we'll do temporary works and then find you get drawn into every bit of propping and false work design and that may occur on the job. So I think, yeah, clear contract, scope of work, what your remuneration is for that, and what the deliverables are.
Well, we've only got 5 or 6 minutes left, so we'll try to go through these last few. Exposure to private individuals, please elaborate more. General practitioners often work for private entities, I'm assuming.
Exposure to private individuals. Well, that's no different than working for a public entity. If you're engaged by a private individual to design a house or a shed or a farm bridge, you're responsible for your services and your actions to that party. No different than a big corporation.
Okay. If my company has the appropriate insurance, do I still need PI insurance? I think we've covered that off previously. Do brokers approach CEAS for cover quotations, or do engineering companies need to approach CEAS directly? Do brokers approach CEAS for cover quotations, or do engineering companies need to approach CEAS directly?
If an engineer wanted a quote from CEAS, they would receive that from our broker. Okay. So, yeah, their brokers act on our behalf.
I'm not sure about Dean's comment here. They would be signing it off. But from Rachel, our experience, subcontractors need their own back-to-back insurance, AON, really only consider it covered under firm policy if hired as an employee, part-time or casual. Yeah,
I think that supports what I was saying, that preferable to have your own insurance under, unless it's we get this from time to time for when people are exiting firms. They may have been an employee and then they might remain on the payroll for a transition period if they're leaving, under good terms and setting up their own company. So it is possible to still remain on a firm's payroll and carry out work as an employee, but it gets messy if you're then transitioning into subcontracting work. So far better to make a clean break, have your own insurance cover as you're subcontracting back.
Okay.
Worst case scenario, if the firm that you were subcontracting to, if there was a problem with their insurance policy, or if they'd let it lapse, and you found that you're high and dry. So yeah, better to have your own cover.
So this question from Joshua is further to Dean's question regarding signing off on behalf of being subcontracted to another company. Does that mean that we can subcontract project to freelance engineers and sign off by our own PI? Apparently the freelance engineers do not have a firm.
Don't know what that's referring to.
I'm assuming that is if a freelance engineer will be covered by whoever is hiring their own professional indemnity insurance.
It depends who the freelance engineer is. I think there's a lot of contracting out of drafting resources and offshore drafting resources. I think a firm, if you're hiring freelance engineers or draftsmen or any other or survey inputs, you're taking responsibility for that work.
Okay, that's last few questions. What is your view on research that indicates nice doctors don't get sued as often in the USA? How can you use your customer service to avoid claims arising? Any comment on that?
Yeah, I think I touched on that under how do we avoid being sued. Communication is key. It was one of the first things that Peter also mentioned is stay close to your client and find out what they want when they want it. If something's not going well, don't hide behind emails and avoid communicating with your client. Find out what the issues are and yeah, honesty and professionalism and be nice.
Great.
Yeah, I think it's harder if engineers, sometimes are guilty of just burying their head in their calculations and their drawings and not having the uncomfortable conversations about changes and variations and needing extra fees or extra time to do something properly, or if another team member's letting everyone down and holding things up. So far better to have those conversations early and stay on side with your client.
Okay, from Fluent Solutions, as a design consultant, if you have an ACENZ SFA agreement with a client, which is liability limited to say 100,000 or 5 times the fee, then if you're asked to provide a building schedule 1A certificate for 2 million council requirements, is the consultant limited to the SFA and it's for the client to be responsible for the remainder of the cover?
I'm not sure where that's come from. So is that an Auckland City Council requirement?
It says that the 2 million is a council requirement. It could be Auckland.
Yeah, that sounds like a fairly large commission. If council is requesting that, then if it's known up front, I don't know where that's come from. I can't imagine the council requiring that level of cover. It goes well above and beyond what's required on the standard short form agreement, producer statement agreement. So that's really a discussion that the council would have with the client if they're asking something that's almost an order of magnitude higher than the appropriate PI level of cover that the client has agreed with the consultant.
Okay, great.
Yeah, no, that's I haven't heard of that.
They say it's from NZS 4404 Schedule 1A.
NZS 440.
4.
Is that a subdivision
I'm not too sure.
standard or?
Yes, Nathan says yes.
No. Yeah, sorry, I can't comment, but it sounds like a reasonably large commission that
Land development and subdivision infrastructure.
yeah. And just sorry, we're slightly over time, but the thing is the last revision of the short form agreement changed the old 5 times the fee rule to be a fairer band of 5 times the fee with a minimum cap of 100 and a maximum cap of 500, which was any contract needs to be fair to both parties. So for a very small parcel of work, if we're only providing a limitation of liability of a few tens of thousands of dollars or a few $1,000s, and something went wrong, that is unfair to the client. So if someone is signing up to a large or complex piece of work, it's not necessarily being clever by getting your client to agree to an abnormally low level of limit. So for a subdivision piece, maybe the $2 million as a PI offering was the right one, which to tie in with what the council is working. So yeah,
Okay.
keep it. I'm contradicting myself, but keep it reasonable and low. Don't get badgered into providing ridiculously high levels of PI cover, and certainly not unlimited liability, but it's got to be fair to both parties.
Great. I think that's all we've got time for today. Thanks very much for your expertise today, Craig. It's very insightful, as you can see from all of the questions. The next webinar will be on the 14th of September. Will be presented by Ed Bermudez, who will cover safety and design. Don't forget to send your feedback and suggestions to us at the Engineering New Zealand website. And see you all next month.